The afternoon sun sagged low over the Tennessee hills as Emma Lawson guided her aging sedan along the empty rural highway. She had been driving for 6 hours with only gas station coffee and her own unraveling thoughts for company. The air inside the car smelled faintly of cardboard boxes and desperation. Everything she owned was stuffed in the back seat. Everything she had lost still clung to her like a shadow. When the engine coughed once, then again, and let out a rattling groan, Emma whispered a plea for it to hold on just a few more miles. It did not. The car shuddered, lurched, and rolled to a sputtering stop directly beneath a faded sign that read, "Welcome to Cedar Ridge." The timing felt almost cruel. Emma rested her forehead on the steering wheel. She had been fired from her job at the call center. Her landlord had handed her an eviction notice with practiced sympathy. Her boyfriend had packed his suitcase before she could form a coherent protest. Every door in her life had closed so quickly that now the silence around her felt cavernous. Tears stung her eyes. She pushed them back. Crying would not coax the engine back to life. She stepped outside into the warm rural stillness, unsure whether to scream, pray, or laugh. No signal on her phone. No cars in sight. Cedar Ridge stretched ahead, quiet and unfamiliar. She checked under the hood the way someone checks the pulse of a stranger, knowing full well she had no idea what she was looking at. The heat from the engine radiated upward, rippling the air. She whispered another defeated plea. Please just work. She knew better. Hope alone never fixed anything. A rumble of an approaching vehicle drifted over the rise behind her. Emma straightened, shielding her eyes. A weathered blue pickup truck rolled into view, slowing as it approached her stranded car. For a moment she tensed. She was alone on an empty road in a town she had never lived in. The truck pulled up beside her and the window lowered. A man leaned out, his voice low and steady. "Everything all right?" She fought the urge to say yes out of politeness, but instead admitted the truth. "The car just died and I think it finally gave up on me." The man stepped out, tall, sun-browned, wearing work boots and jeans dusted with sawdust, sleeves pushed up over strong forearms streaked with motor oil. His presence was grounding in a way she did not expect. "Lucas Hale," he introduced himself, though he said it casually as if the name carried no particular weight. He asked if she minded him taking a look. She stepped aside. He popped the hood with the ease of someone who had spent half his life leaning over engines. Within minutes, he diagnosed a blown belt and a failing alternator. He offered to rig a temporary fix so she could at least reach her grandparents' house. As he worked, Emma watched the sun dip lower, painting the horizon gold. She had never felt so adrift and yet so strangely seen. When Lucas finished and the engine coughed back to life, he refused more than a token payment. He offered to follow her into town to make sure the car did not die again. She accepted, grateful and exhausted. As she drove the last mile toward Cedar Ridge with his pickup steady in her rearview mirror, Emma felt for the first time in weeks that maybe she was not entirely alone. Emma found the auto shop the next morning, tucked behind a row of cedar trees on a quiet side street. Hale Garage was nothing like the sleek city repair shop she was used to. It was an old timber frame building with a wide barn door pulled open, revealing the ribcage of a classic 1968 Camaro suspended on a lift. The scent of motor oil, warm metal, and cedar shavings lingered in the air. A radio hummed softly somewhere in the background, playing a country song about second chances. Emma stepped into the shade of the doorway, unsure whether to interrupt. She didn't have to. A wrench clattered on steel, and Lucas rolled out from beneath the Camaro on a low creeper, blinking up at her with a mix of surprise and amusement. "Morning, stranded traveler," he said, pushing himself to his feet. "I was wondering if you'd make it in before the alternator gave up again." His smile was disarmingly genuine, warm enough to disarm her anxiety, but not so bold as to make her uncomfortable. He waved her closer as he wiped his hands on a rag. While he inspected her engine, they talked. It startled her how natural the conversation felt. She found herself telling him about her old job at the call center, about the endless stream of customers who forgot she was human, about the eviction notice slapped onto her door the same day she lost her job. She confessed the one thing she had never said out loud to anyone in years. "I want to be a writer. Not someday, now, but I was too afraid to start." Lucas listened without interrupting, his calm attention steady and focused. When he finally spoke, his answer was thoughtful. "Fear is loud, but it doesn't tell the truth. You'd be surprised how much stronger you are than it is." His hands moved with effortless confidence across the engine, tightening bolts and replacing worn parts. He looked every bit a man content with simple work and an honest life. And yet something didn't match. When his phone vibrated in his pocket, he paused mid-sentence. The cheerful mechanic expression drained from his face, replaced by a taut seriousness that felt foreign to the oil-stained garage. He stepped away to answer. His voice lowered, but in the cavernous space she still heard enough. "No delays. Postpone the shareholder briefing. Tell the Tokyo team I will speak with them Monday." Emma froze. Shareholders? Tokyo? None of that made sense. He ended the call, exhaled sharply, and slipped the phone back into his pocket. When he turned back to her, the friendly smile returned, but not fully. Something guarded lingered in his eyes. She tried to joke about the Tokyo line item, expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, he looked away, gripping the edge of the workbench as though steadying himself. "My family has business, complicated business. I try to stay out of it, but sometimes they pull me in." He left it at that, the sentence hanging in the air like a closed door. A warning: do not ask more. Emma drove away with her car humming smoothly for the first time in months, yet her thoughts churned. Lucas Hale was a gentle mechanic who read her emotions like a book. But behind his easy smile was something else, something carefully hidden. She didn't know what it was, but she knew this much. No one in Cedar Ridge talked about shareholders. A week later, Emma sat on her grandparents' front porch, the humid Tennessee afternoon pressing warmly against her skin as she stared at the blinking cursor on her laptop. A single paragraph floated lonely and inadequate on the blank white page. She rubbed her temples, frustration tightening around her ribs like a vice. Her ideas felt stale, predictable, hollow. She had fled the city for clarity, but all she had found was a deeper echo of the same creative silence. She closed the laptop with a soft groan. That was when she heard the rumble of a familiar truck approaching the house. The sound wrapped around her like a memory of comfort she didn't know she needed. Lucas stepped out of the faded blue pickup with an easy confidence that made her pulse stumble. He was holding a worn paperback in one hand and a crooked smile in the other. "Writer's block?" he asked, leaning against the porch railing with a look that read her mood instantly. "More like a writer's fortress," she muttered, sinking back into the swing. "The walls feel taller every day." Lucas considered her for a moment, his eyes warm with mischief and something gentler beneath it. "Too much city still stuck in your head," he said. "Come on, I'm going to show you how life actually works around here." Before she could protest, he had opened the passenger door of his truck. The invitation was wordless and irresistible. She grabbed her shoes and followed. He drove her away from the paved streets into a network of rolling dirt roads lined with tall grasses and wildflowers. After several winding turns, they arrived at a sprawling ranch that looked like it belonged in a watercolor painting. Sunlight washed over wide pastures, the air heavy with the scent of earth, hay, and summer. "A friend of mine owns the place," Lucas explained as he guided her toward a fenced pasture. "Thought it might clear your head." The ranch became a montage of unexpected lessons and laughter. Lucas taught her how to approach a horse gently, how to read its movements, how to hold the reins without looking like she was strangling them. When her grip faltered, he stepped behind her, adjusting her hands with a touch so light it felt like a spark traveling through her veins. His breath brushed her temple as he murmured quiet instructions, and for a moment the world shrank to the warmth of his hands over hers and the steady rhythm of the horse beside them. Later, he dared her to milk a cow. She tried. The cow tolerated her. Lucas received a direct spray of warm milk across his shirt. His stunned expression lasted half a heartbeat before dissolving into a deep, rolling laugh that echoed across the fields like sunlight made sound. She doubled over laughing too, losing all the tension she had carried since she left the city. As golden hours settled across the ranch, they sat on the weathered wooden steps of the main house, sipping cold lemonade in comfortable silence. Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Light. Present. Whole. When she finally looked at him, he was already watching her, an intensity in his gaze that made her breath catch. He shifted closer, the warmth of him a tangible thread between them. For a heartbeat, the world held still. His eyes dropped to her lips, her pulse fluttered. He leaned in, and then he stopped. A small flicker of conflict crossed his face, heavy and undeniable. He gently pressed a soft kiss to her forehead instead, a gesture both tender and devastating. It was sweetness wrapped in retreat. It was a door closing just as she reached for the handle. Emma walked away from that day with her head full of sunlight and her heart full of questions. Lucas walked away cursing himself quietly, knowing the truth. He wanted her more than anything, but he was hiding too much to deserve her kiss. The sickness arrived without warning, slipping into Emma's body like a thief in the night. One moment she was brushing her teeth and preparing for bed, and the next she was shivering violently despite the warm Tennessee air drifting through the open window. Her head throbbed with a deep pulsing ache, her limbs turning heavy and uncooperative. By dawn she was trapped beneath a mountain of fever and chills, her breath shallow, her thoughts splintering into fragments. She tried to move through it on her own. She didn't want to worry her grandparents, who were already doing more for her than she'd ever asked of anyone. She managed to stumble to the kitchen for water, gripping the counter when a wave of dizziness nearly dropped her to the floor. Her reflection in the microwave door startled her. Pale, sunken, eyes glazed. She barely recognized her own face. By midday she retreated to her bed, surrendering to the fever's relentless assault. 2 days passed in a haze of half-sleep and shivering sweats. She barely picked up her phone, and her replies to Lucas's texts were short, delayed, and fragmented. His worry grew into something sharp and insistent. She didn't sound like herself. She didn't sound fine. And the silence between messages stretched longer each hour. By the third morning, he could no longer ignore the feeling clawing at his chest. Under the pretense of returning a book she had lent him, he drove to her grandparents' house. Her grandmother answered the door, worry etched in every line of her face. "She's not been herself," she said quietly, "barely eating, barely awake, burning up." Lucas didn't hesitate. "Let me see her." She was curled beneath quilts, her skin slick with sweat, her breathing shallow and labored. The sight hit him like a physical blow. He sat beside her and gently placed the back of his hand against her forehead. Heat radiated through his skin. The cheerful mechanic vanished. In his place stood a man with a strange, quiet authority, someone who knew what to do even before the thought fully formed. He spoke calmly with her grandparents, reassuring them with a steadiness that surprised even them. He left for the pharmacy and returned with medicine, electrolyte drinks, and ingredients for homemade soup. Then he took over the sick room with a focus that left no room for argument. He coaxed her to sip water. He kept track of her medication schedule. He read aloud from the book she'd been struggling with days earlier, his deep voice smoothing the jagged edges of her feverish thoughts. He stayed by her side for hours, a silent sentinel who refused to leave. That night, her fever soared. Emma tossed restlessly, mumbling fragments of fears she never voiced when awake. "Not good enough," she whispered. "Everyone leaves." The words sliced through him. He thought she was dreaming of old heartbreaks, of the pain she carried from losing her job and her home. He leaned closer, his hand wrapping around hers, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. "You are more than enough," he whispered into the dimly lit room. "You're everything. I'm not going anywhere." He believed she couldn't hear him. He believed his confession would dissolve into her fever dreams. But Emma heard him. Not with perfect clarity, not with reason, but with the raw, vulnerable part of her that clung to his voice like a lifeline. Those whispered words anchored her, they soothed her, they terrified her. Because even through the haze, one question formed in the depths of her mind. Who exactly was the man holding her hand in the dark? Emma was finally well enough to sit on the porch swing a few days later, wrapped in a quilt despite the warm afternoon. Weakness clung to her like a second skin, but her mind was finally clear. She held the new sketchbook Lucas had given her, though she hadn't yet opened it. She was trying to soak in the gentle sunlight when a sleek black sedan glided to a stop down the street. It was the sort of car that did not belong in Cedar Ridge. Silent, polished, expensive. A cutting silhouette against the soft, rural backdrop. A woman stepped out, tall, impeccably dressed, in a charcoal pantsuit tailored with surgical precision. Her hair, a glossy dark chestnut, was swept into a smooth twist. Her posture radiated a degree of authority that did not come from confidence alone, but from years accustomed to commanding rooms. She paused on the sidewalk, staring across the road at Hale Garage. The expression on her face was complicated. Not anger, not judgment, something quieter. Sadness threaded with disappointment and a fatigue too heavy to hide. Emma's grip tightened on the mug of tea in her hands. She had never seen this woman before, but instinctively she knew. This person was not a customer. After a moment of hesitation, the woman straightened her shoulders and walked toward the garage with purposeful strides. Every inch of her was out of place among the rustic wooden buildings and gravel roads. Emma watched her disappear through the open bay door. Something in her chest tightened. It wasn't jealousy, it was concern. Deep protective concern for a man who had read to her for hours when she was delirious with fever. Before she could talk herself out of it, she rose slowly from the swing. She filled a travel mug with fresh coffee from the kitchen. It gave her an excuse, however flimsy, and made her way across the street. The gravel crunched softly beneath her shoes. She reached the open doorway just as raised voices drifted out. Not shouting, but tense. Emotion tightly wound and fighting for control. She froze just outside the threshold, hidden from view. The woman's voice, taut with exhaustion, cut through the stillness. Her tone was sharp, but beneath it was something maternal and aching. "I can't keep doing this, Lucas. The board is pressuring me for decisions your father would never have allowed. The Hong Kong team is threatening to walk if we don't finalize leadership assignments. And every night I sit in that office staring at your father's portrait, and all I hear is the same question. Where is my son?" Emma's blood ran cold. Lucas's voice, when it came, was tight, frustrated, but it was also unmistakably formal, almost unrecognizable. "Mother, I asked for time. 6 months. That was the agreement. Time for what she demanded, her voice breaking on the edges. To hide here under an alias while the company your father built begins to fracture." A weighted silence filled the air. Emma clutched the coffee mug so tightly her knuckles whitened. The woman wasn't just someone important from Lucas's past. She was his mother. And not just any mother. A mother who spoke of boards, of divisions, of an empire. An empire. Lucas's calm voice shifted, low and raw. "I needed space. I needed to know who I am without the entire world telling me." The woman's reply landed with the force of a hammer. "Your father didn't build that world so you could run from it." Emma backed away quietly, her pulse hammering. The truth was clear, painfully clear. Lucas Hale wasn't just a gentle mechanic with warm eyes and grease on his hands. He was the heir to a corporate dynasty, and everything between them had been built on a lie she hadn't even known existed. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon in bruised shades of violet and gold, Emma sat on the porch swing with her knees drawn to her chest. The gentle creak of the chains was the only sound in the thick stillness. She stared at nothing, replaying every moment she had shared with Lucas. Every smile, every laugh, every whispered comfort spoken into her feverish darkness. All of it now tilted sideways, reframed by the truth she had overheard. He wasn't simply Lucas Hale, the quiet mechanic with a patient touch and warm eyes. He was Lucas Hale, son of the late corporate titan Robert Hale, hidden heir to an empire worth more than she could imagine. A man who had stepped out of a boardroom and into a garage because that was the only place where his heart still felt like his. And he had never told her. The gravel path crunched softly. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. His presence settled over her like a shadow she had both longed for and feared. Lucas stopped at the foot of the porch steps. He had changed clothes, but the conflict in his eyes was unmistakable. He looked as if he had fought 3 battles in one day and lost every single one. "I saw you today," he said quietly, "near the garage. So I guess you know." Emma didn't answer. Her silence was not cold, it was heavy, expectant, waiting for him to step into the truth. He moved slowly up the steps and sat in the wicker chair beside her, leaving a small distance between them. Close enough to feel his warmth, far enough to feel the fracture. "My father," he began, and even saying the words seemed to hurt. "He was a force, bigger than life, built everything from nothing. And he loved me. But he loved me the way he loved the company, in goals, in numbers, in what he thought I could become. He measured everything with the same ruler." His voice faltered, then steadied. "When he died at his desk, I didn't just lose him. I saw my future, the same desk, the same exhaustion, the same loneliness in a skyscraper full of people who only ever smiled at the balance sheet, not at me." Emma's chest tightened. It was the most vulnerable she had ever seen him. "So I left," he continued. "I came here, I worked with my hands. I breathed without cameras and shareholders tracking my every move. And for the first time since he died, I felt like I was building something real, something that didn't own me." He looked at her then, really looked. "And then I met you. And you were the only person in years who saw me, not the name, not the money, just me." The confession hung in the humid air. Emma swallowed, her voice low but steady. "I understand why you needed to run, why you needed to find yourself." She turned to him, her eyes shimmering with hurt that cut deeper than any anger. "But the lie isn't what hurts, Lucas. It's the reason for it." He froze. "You've been here for months, you listened to me, you learned me, and still, somewhere deep down, you didn't trust me. You kept waiting for me to prove that I wanted something from you. You were testing me without telling me I was being tested." He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "You weren't hiding from your world," she whispered. "You were hiding from me." She stood, her breath unsteady. "I just need time. I fell for someone who I thought trusted me as much as I trusted him. And right now, I don't know which version of you is real. And I don't think you do either." She stepped inside and closed the screen door softly. Not a slam, just a quiet, devastating ending to the conversation he had feared most. Lucas sat there long after the porch light flickered on, staring at the closed door. Not shattered by anger, shattered by the terrible clarity that she was right. He hadn't lost her to the truth. He had lost her to fear. The weeks that followed unfolded in a blur of quiet mornings and sleepless nights. Emma woke each day to the same hollow stillness, the porch swing unmoving, the road empty, the hum of Hale Garage across the street no longer a comforting rhythm, but a reminder of everything that had broken open. Lucas kept his distance, not out of indifference, but out of a desperate respect for the space she had asked for. He worked later than usual, the clang of tools echoing faintly through the dusk, as if he were trying to exhaust himself into numbness. Sometimes she caught glimpses of him, his shoulders tense, his face drawn, his movements mechanical instead of fluid. But he never crossed the road, never looked up, never intruded. He was living in exile within sight of the one person he wanted to run toward. Emma poured her pain into the only place that could hold it, her words. On the third day of silence, she reopened her laptop, her fingers trembling. The first sentence came like a crack in a dam, the second followed with a rush. She wrote for hours, tears blurring the keys, her heart bleeding into her manuscript in long, feverish torrents. Every feeling she was too proud or too frightened to say aloud became ink on the screen. The disappointment, the longing, the betrayal that wasn't quite betrayal, the fragile, stubborn hope that refused to die. Her protagonist became a mirror of her grief, stumbling through a maze of trust and truth, carving herself into someone braver, someone who dared to believe in second chances even when they hurt. The manuscript grew quickly, almost violently. Page after page, Emma worked as if the story itself might be the thing that saved her from drowning. Her grandparents watched her with quiet concern, sensing the storm inside her, but knowing better than to interfere. The rhythmic clicking of keys filled the house at all hours. She forgot to eat. She survived on coffee, stubbornness, and the thinnest thread of purpose. One gray afternoon, almost a month after the porch confrontation, her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed the last word. The end. She stared at the screen, chest rising and falling with a strange mixture of triumph and devastation. Finishing the manuscript didn't mend her heart. It simply revealed how fractured it still was. She closed the laptop and sat in the silence, feeling both emptied and overflowing. But she wasn't done. Her next battle was publishing. She researched agents late into the night, sending out query letters with trembling hope. The rejections trickled in slowly but relentlessly. "Thank you for your submission, but not a fit. Not at this time. Not what we are looking for." One agent requested the first chapter, and for a moment, Emma felt breathless with possibility. But the follow-up email was gentle, apologetic, and devastatingly familiar. "It's beautiful, but the market is tough. Try again, somewhere else." She then explored self-publishing. The cost estimates made her stomach twist. She had no savings left, no resources, no safety net. Her dream, so tangible on her laptop, felt suddenly like a window she could see through but never reach. She tried not to think of Lucas, but he was there in every quiet moment. In the way her chest tightened when she heard his truck start at dawn. In the ache of watching him walk past the house with his shoulders hunched. In the lingering memory of his hand wrapped around hers in the fever-lit dark. She had lost him. Or maybe she had let him go. She did not know which truth hurt worse. But she knew this. She had written something real, something born from pain but shaped by courage. Even if the world never read it, she had finished it. In the empty space he left behind, she had built something of her own, and it was only the beginning. The email arrived on a quiet afternoon when the world felt suspended between hope and resignation. Emma had been sorting through another stack of rejection messages, each one as politely crushing as the last, when a new subject line blinked into her inbox. "Publishing proposal for your manuscript." Her heart skipped once, then again. She clicked it open with trembling fingers. The message was from a small, prestigious artisan press in Nashville, known for its handcrafted bindings and limited edition prints. They had read the synopsis and first chapter she'd posted on a local writers' forum. They were captivated. They wanted to publish her novel. All of it. Editing, designing, printing, distributing an initial run of 2,000 copies. And then came the part that made her breath catch in her throat. The entire cost had already been covered by an anonymous benefactor, a patron of the arts who wished to support emerging talent in the region. The donor insisted upon absolute anonymity. They were never to be identified. Ever. Emma froze, the joyful rush in her chest collapsing inward. There was only one person in Cedar Ridge who had both the means and the motive. Lucas. And if it was Lucas, then it wasn't charity. It was guilt. It was pity disguised as generosity. He had heard her say she needed to do this alone and decided he knew better. He had taken her dream, the one thing she was desperate to build on her own terms, and put his fingerprints all over it. She printed the email, her hands shaking with quiet fury. She didn't storm across the street. She marched with the cold, precise resolve of someone whose heart had just cracked in the very place healing was supposed to begin. The bell over the door of Hale Garage chimed sharply. Lucas looked up from sanding a piece of reclaimed wood, and for a moment the hope on his face softened everything inside her. Then he saw her expression, and the hope extinguished. "I can't accept this," she said softly, placing the printed email on the workbench between them. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Calm anger carried far more weight. He scanned the paper, confusion knotting his brow. "Emma, there's been a misunderstanding. I have no idea what this is." She almost faltered. Almost. But then she remembered the board meeting call she overheard. The secrets. The dynasty behind the grease-stained disguise. "Please don't lie to me," she whispered. "I told you I needed to do this myself. I don't want your money. I don't want your guilt fixing things for me." His eyes tightened with something like hurt. Then a rueful smile tugged quietly at his lips. "Emma, if I had known you needed help, I probably would have done exactly this, and I would have gotten it just as wrong. But it wasn't me." Before she could answer, the bell chimed again. A woman entered, her heels clicking softly against the concrete. The same woman from the black sedan. The same woman whose presence had shattered the illusion of Lucas's simple life. His mother. Her eyes moved from Emma's pale face to Lucas's stricken expression to the paper on the workbench. "Ah," she breathed, "so my anonymity did not last." Emma's breath left her body. "You," she whispered. The older woman nodded, stepping closer. "I am the patron, not because of who you are to my son, because your story reminded me of who my son could be if he chose happiness over inheritance." The truth landed between them like a stone dropped into deep water. Lucas stared at his mother, astonished. Emma stood frozen, the anger draining from her, replaced by dawning clarity and a fragile, painful relief. The benefactor had not been the man she thought had betrayed her. It had been the woman who wanted her son to finally step into a life he chose for himself. The room fell silent as the realization washed through all three of them, reshaping everything they thought they knew. After Lucas's mother left, the garage sank into a heavy, contemplative stillness. The scent of sawdust and machine oil hung in the air like a memory that refused to settle. Emma stood beside the workbench, the printed email now a harmless piece of paper instead of a declaration of betrayal. She felt small beneath the weight of everything she had misinterpreted and everything she had endured. Yet the humiliation was softened by the truth that had emerged so unexpectedly. It had not been Lucas. It had never been him. Lucas watched her carefully, waiting for the storm, waiting for the hurt, waiting for anything. What came instead was a quiet apology that cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. "I'm sorry," she said, her fingers tracing the grain of the workbench. "I accused you without letting you explain." His reaction was immediate. "No, you assumed the most logical thing based on the man I showed you I was. This is on me, not you." He stepped closer, not closing the distance entirely, but bridging enough of it for honesty to flow between them. "Emma, each moment I spent with you, I was still looking backward. I was so convinced people saw my last name instead of me that I kept testing you without even realizing it. I didn't doubt you. I doubted that something like this could be real." She looked up. Vulnerability softened the tension in his jaw, revealing the man beneath both the grease and the legacy. In that moment, she saw the full weight he carried, the shadow of a father who had loved him through expectations instead of presence, the impossibility of being both the heir and the man he wanted to be, the fear that anyone who saw the whole truth would walk away. Her voice was gentler now, but steady. "I wasn't hurt because you were someone else. I was hurt because you didn't trust who I was." He flinched. Not visibly, but she felt it. The last of her anger eased into something calmer, heavier, more honest. She exhaled and asked the question that mattered most. "So what do we do now?" Lucas understood instantly. The question wasn't an invitation for promises or poetry. It was a challenge, a test of whether he could choose transparency over fear, a request for proof, not apologies. He took in a slow breath. "Okay, no more secrets, no more hiding. No more versions of me, just the one who wants to stand beside you without all the noise." He held her gaze with a small, nervous smile that felt more sincere than anything he had said before. "For that to work, you'll have to let me take you on a proper first date. For real this time." It was not a grand gesture, not diamonds or declarations or sweeping speeches. It was simple, brave, human. It was a beginning, not a fix. Emma felt something shift, a tiny hinge turning in her chest. She wasn't ready to forgive everything. She wasn't ready to fall back into his arms. But she was ready to see what he did next. She gave a small nod. Slow, cautious, but real. A crack in the door he had thought she would keep shut forever. Lucas released a breath he had been holding for weeks, his smile widening into something unguarded and luminous. The path back to each other wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, both of them were standing at the same starting line, and neither was running away. The next evening unfolded with a strange mix of nerves and anticipation that Emma hadn't felt in years. She waited on her grandparents' porch, fingers curling and uncurling against the soft fabric of her dress. Her mind kept circling the same questions. What version of Lucas would show up tonight? The mechanic with grease on his hands, or the heir with the world on his shoulders? Or maybe, finally, impossibly, the man caught somewhere in between. She half expected a limousine or something equally overwhelming. Maybe even a sleek helicopter touching down in the meadow across the road. The possibilities made her chest tighten with apprehension. She didn't want grandeur, she wanted sincerity. She wanted the man who kissed her forehead instead of her mouth because his lies felt like poison. Then she heard it. The deep, throaty rumble of an engine that vibrated through the evening air. But it wasn't a limousine, it wasn't a corporate car. It was the 1968 Camaro from Hale Garage, now restored to a breathtaking shine. Deep blue paint glimmered like twilight itself. Chrome caught the porch light, flashing like a promise. When Lucas stepped out, Emma felt the breath leave her body. He wasn't wearing a suit or his usual grease-stained shirt. Instead, he wore dark jeans and a simple black button-down that framed the solid lines of his shoulders. But what struck her most was the expression on his face, a quiet, hopeful smile. A softness she hadn't seen since before everything broke apart. "Ready?" he asked. Just one word, but it carried depth, sincerity, and something like fear. She nodded, and they drove away from town. Past the quiet diners, past the ranch, past everything familiar. The sky grew darker, jeweled with early stars, until Lucas turned onto an unmarked dirt road that wound steeply upward. When they reached the top, Emma gasped despite herself. An abandoned observatory stood silhouetted against the night sky, its dome rusted but majestic. Inside, the dusty floor had been swept clean. In the center stood a powerful telescope already angled toward the heavens. Nearby lay a soft blanket and a wicker basket filled with sandwiches from the Cedar Ridge Diner, a bottle of red wine, and 2 glasses that glimmered in the thin moonlight. He shrugged almost sheepishly. "Before cars and engines, this was my first love. Astronomy. I wanted to be an astronomer before I understood what the Hale name meant." He led her to the telescope, adjusting the lens with a familiar tenderness. When she looked through it, the sky exploded alive. Constellations, clusters, a faint silver river of the Milky Way. Lucas stood beside her, pointing out each star with a quiet reverence. His voice dropped to a low murmur as he shared stories his father once told him, when Lucas was still small enough to believe that starlight could fix anything. Memories of nights on the back porch. The rare moments when his father wasn't consumed by rising markets or international deals. The last fragments of a childhood untouched by empire. As he spoke, his phone buzzed. The screen lit up with the name Marcus Thorne, CFO. A call he could not ignore. A voice he always answered. A world he always returned to. Emma watched him carefully, her breath caught. Lucas looked at the screen, looked at Emma. Then slowly, deliberately, he pressed the button to silence the phone and slipped it into his pocket. "They can wait," he said softly. The significance hit her like a gentle sunrise. He had chosen her, explicitly, unmistakably. The night grew colder around them, but the space between them warmed. A new kind of gravity settled in the air as they sat shoulder to shoulder beneath the cosmos, the blanket wrapped around them both. And for the first time, the mechanic and the air were not fighting each other inside him. He was simply Lucas, and she was the person he wanted to look at instead of the stars. They left the observatory close to midnight, the stars thinning into a softer haze as the town lights came faintly into view. Emma felt lighter than she had in months, her heart lifting with the slow, steady rise of something she almost feared naming. Lucas drove with one hand on the wheel and one resting palm up between them, an invitation she finally accepted with a quiet intertwining of fingers. For a moment, the world felt simple, possible. But possibility has a way of drawing out the shadows that prefer to stay hidden. Near the bend past Miller Creek, a sudden flash of headlights blinded them. A black SUV barreled across the center line, weaving erratically. Emma gasped. Lucas swerved hard, tires screeching across the gravel shoulder. The Camaro fishtailed, skidding dangerously close to the ravine edge before he wrestled it under control. The SUV sped off into the darkness without slowing. They sat in stunned silence, hearts pounding. Lucas exhaled shakily, gripping the wheel. That was deliberate. Emma stared at him. How can you possibly know? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he eased the car back onto the road, jaw set in a way she had only seen once before. In the boardroom, on the call she wasn't meant to hear. Back at her grandparents' farmhouse, the porch light cast long shadows as he walked her to the steps. She turned to face him, her breath still unsteady. Someone tried to run us off the road. That isn't just your family being complicated, that's something else. Something worse. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they held a truth that had been trapped far too long. My father left more than a company behind. He left debts. Enemies. The kind that don't send polite emails. He told her about the lawsuit buried deep, the fraud allegations kept quiet by board money. The man who disappeared after threatening to take the truth public. The Hale empire had been built on both brilliance and ruthlessness. Not all of it was Lucas's father, but enough of it was. Enough for the consequences to spill forward into Lucas's life, into hers. Emma felt the cold night settle into her bones. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you looking at me and seeing the shadows instead of the man trying to step out of them. A distant thunder rolled across the hills, the storm gathering in the dark. They stood inches apart, the air between them charged with fear and something fiercer, something protective, something real. Emma searched his face. There are things you can keep from the rest of the world, but not from me. Not if you want this to work. He nodded once, a promise forming in the tension of his shoulders. Then he stepped closer, cupping her face as if she were the only steady thing left in a falling world. Before either could speak, the porch light flickered. A figure emerged from the corner of the yard. Emma tensed. Lucas shifted instinctively in front of her. But it wasn't a stranger, it was her grandfather, usually calm and steady, now pale as parchment. He held his phone in one trembling hand. Emma, honey, you need to come inside. It's your grandmother. She collapsed at the market. They've taken her to the hospital. The night, already fractured by danger, shattered completely. Emma felt the world tilt beneath her feet as Lucas reached for her, steadying her just as her knees buckled. Their first perfect night had become the night when everything fell apart at once. And neither of them had any idea that the SUV, the collapsing grandmother, and the secrets still buried in the Hale dynasty were all threads of the same storm now closing in around them. The hospital waiting room hummed with the low throb of fluorescent lights and the distant rhythm of machines beyond closed doors. Emma sat on the edge of a plastic chair, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched white. Lucas stood a few feet away, leaning against the wall, eyes fixed on her as if afraid she might unravel completely if he dared to blink. Her grandfather paced in slow, anxious circles, every turn punctuated by a soft whisper of prayer. Moments stretched, shadows lengthened. Finally, a doctor emerged. Emma rose so fast the room spun. She is stable, the doctor said with a calmness that tethered her back to the ground. Severe arrhythmia. We are monitoring her closely. She woke once asking for you. Relief washed over Emma, leaving her trembling. She thanked the doctor before hurrying down the hall to her grandmother's room. Inside, the machines blinked gentle reassurance. Her grandmother opened her eyes when Emma stepped in, offering a frail smile that still held the warmth of 1,000 childhood mornings. Emma sank into the chair beside the bed, gripping the hand that had always steadied her. "I am not leaving you," Emma whispered, "not for a moment." Her grandmother studied her quietly, as if reading a secret written beneath her skin. "He is a good boy," she murmured, "but good boys sometimes carry dangerous shadows. Make sure he fights them. Do not let them swallow him whole." Emma's breath caught. It was not just intuition. Her grandmother had seen the headlines years ago, connected dots Emma wished had nothing to do with her life now. Before she could answer, her grandmother drifted back into a peaceful sleep, leaving the words hanging like a prophecy. When Emma stepped back into the corridor, Lucas straightened. The fear in his eyes softened the instant he saw her. "She is going to be all right?" he asked quietly. Emma nodded, but the space between them was no longer the effortless closeness from the observatory. Something heavier now lived there, something they had to face. He exhaled. "You should go home and rest. I will drive you." But when they reached the farmhouse, he did not turn off the engine. Both remained silent until the night wrapped around them like a question neither knew how to answer. Emma finally spoke. "Whoever was in that SUV tonight could have killed us. And it was not random. I need you to tell me everything. Every name, every deal, every threat. I will not walk into this blind." Lucas stared ahead at the darkened road, his voice raw. "I wanted to keep you safe by keeping you out of it. But you are already in it, because of me." He told her everything then. The disgraced investor whose fortune collapsed after Hale acquisitions. The partner forced out in a hostile maneuver engineered by Lucas's father. The detective who vanished after digging too deeply. And now the man recently released from private custody arrangements, a man with nothing left to lose. The same man who once vowed to destroy the Hale family piece by piece. When Lucas finally fell silent, Emma realized the truth landed differently than she expected. She was not afraid of Lucas. She was afraid of what loving him would cost. But she also knew something else with absolute clarity. Running would not save either of them. It would only leave them isolated targets in a storm too large for one person to weather alone. She turned to him, her voice barely above a breath. "If we do this, then we do it together. No secrets, no half-truths. No disappearing into shadows when things get hard." His gaze lifted to meet hers, stunned by the certainty in her tone. "Emma, you do not know what you are choosing." She reached out, placing her hand over his. "Yes, I do. I am choosing to stop being afraid of the truth. I am choosing you. But only if you choose me with the same honesty." The clock on the dashboard ticked once, twice. Then Lucas closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, as if stepping over a threshold he had spent his entire life avoiding. "I choose you," he said, "whatever comes." The storm outside thickened, the wind rising through the trees like a warning and a vow. But in the quiet cab of the Camaro, the two of them sat joined not by destiny or convenience, but by a decision that would reshape every step ahead. The danger was not gone. The enemy was not finished. The truth was only beginning to surface. But for the first time, they were ready to face it together.